Shalom, John.
Shalom, Judith.
And we are together again to discuss another parashah. And the parashah for this week we're going to give an overview for is called Tisa, when you take a census. And it's taken from Exodus 30th chapter, 11th verse, through the 34th chapter, the 35th verses. Now this parashah is a really big one because it starts out discussing the census that Moses takes, but then it gets into the dreaded golden calf debacle. Yes.
I think this is, some have said, and I agree, this is a very difficult parashah to explain. Some other things that are revealing to it, revealing as well. But what I found interesting or difficult was that was the sin of the calf. And the big issue here is, will God forgive sin? Now, we are better than 4,000 years from this event. But then at that time, it was a question. Would God forgive sin? If God didn't forgive the sin of the golden calf, then all of the promises, the covenant, that was gone. All of Jewish history would never come about. It was so devastating, I would say, that Moses begged for God to forgive the people. He begged so much so that he was willing to forfeit his life. Also, God gives him an answer, and he answers him in a new revelation. We remember the revelation of God at the burning bush. This revelation has to do with the cleft of the rock. And prior to that, when Moses asked God to forgive his people, he also wanted to know what God's character was like and what God was all about. And God answered him in the cleft of the rock, letting him know his character, what he was all about, so that the Jewish people could continue their relationship with God, and God could continue their relationship with him. What is God all about? He's about forgiving. Yes, he's a just God. He hates sin, but he's compassionate and is willing to forgive.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, yeah. So we are going to have a lot to discuss because I made several notes concerning the debacle, I call it, of the golden calf, and there are many little things that happen that maybe in the English are not so apparent as what's going on, but from the Hebrew gives another story. So you'll want to tune into our upload when we discuss this on Shabbat.
Well, give us a little hint of what you're going to tell.
One of the things that occurred is that they asked, it says in the, I don't have the scripture in front of me, I'm looking at my notes, but they asked for the earrings from the wives, sons, and daughters. Well, obviously it's not the wives asking for the earrings, it's not the sons and daughters asking, so it must be the men who are taking the rings from the ear. So this presents a whole other scenario here, in that the blame, so-called blame for the golden calf, is being laid at the feet of the men. But anyway, we'll discuss that more in detail.
I thought you would talk about the tablets that were delivered twice. One set was written by God. There were two sets of tablets. Mm-hmm. One written by God, one written by Moses.
Well, we'll let you bring that up.
Moses wrote the ones submitted by God.
Well, we'll let you bring that up.
Okay.
And one other thing we'd like to bring up is that starting sundown tonight is the fast of Esther. And then sundown on Wednesday, the 28th of February, begins Purim. And Purim, John, do you know what the story of Purim is about?
Yes, it comes from the story of Esther. And when Mordecai tried to wipe out all the Jews.
Not Mordecai.
Mordecai
was
Mordecai
Esther's
was
son.
Esther's uncle. I'm sorry.
Haman.
Haman.
Roar, and
Haman, okay.
you're supposed to grog or do a grogger. I don't have my grogger, but I have my. Yeah, you're supposed to make a noise when you
To
say
blot
his
out his
name, to
name.
blot out his name. And so it's a very interesting story, according to the sages, as you're so fond of saying,
Saying
that God's name is not mentioned once in this book
Book of
of
Esther.
Esther. But Esther is a fascinating story of God's deliverance of his people. And it's the same story that's being played out even today, where the Hamans of this world desire to try and wipe out God's people, but they have not been successful, and they will never
Not
be
be
successful. The Hamans will not be successful, and so Purim is a really big holiday in Israel because they dress up and and one thing that you're required to do.
Give gifts.
Mishloach manot, I believe that's it. Give baskets, and in that basket usually are sweets and wine. You're supposed to drink the wine. So we are going to be celebrating Purim by giving out the basket, Mishloach manot
And I hope you
baskets.
celebrate as well.
Yes, and so we look forward to seeing you all again for the parashah Tisa. And then again, we wish you a happy Purim and a good rest of the week, Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.